Good evening, time-lost wanderers, and welcome to Series 2, Episode 10 of Hitchcock's Tales That Terrified, Shadows from the Master on SL tonight. Following the Master's curated darkness through every shadow and secret the anthology holds. From the hatching horror of an attic in Episode 9, we step outside tonight, into summer, into warmth and beauty, and a season so perfect it makes the skin purple. Tonight's story is Vintage Season by C.L. Moore. First published in 1946 under the pen name Lawrence O'Donnell, and one of the most quietly devastating pieces of speculative fiction ever written. The premise is deceptively simple. A man rents out rooms in his house to a group of extraordinarily beautiful, extraordinarily cultured strangers. They arrive at the height of summer. They are charming, refined, and slightly wrong in ways he cannot quite name. They are here for the season. They are very particular about which season. C.L. Moore was one of the first women writing science fiction and fantasy at a professional level, publishing in Weird Tales from 1933, a field dominated entirely by men who frequently assumed she was one of them. She wrote under initials for a reason. The quality of Vintage Season makes that reason quietly infuriating. Hitchcock understood stories about beautiful surfaces concealing terrible things. This was one of the finest ever written. Season is open. Let's read. Three people came up the walk to the old mansion just at dawn on a perfect May morning. Oliver Wilson in his pajamas watched them from an upper window through a haze of conflicting emotion. Resentment predominant. He didn't want them there. They were foreigners. He knew only that much about them. They had the curious name of Francisco, and their first names, scrawled in loops on the lease, appeared to be O'Mary, Clef, and Clea, though it was impossible, as he looked down upon them now, to sort them out by signature. He hadn't even been sure whether they would be men or women, and he had expected something a little less cosmopolitan. Oliver's heart sank a little as he watched them follow the taxi driver up the walk. He had hoped for less self-assurance in his unwelcome tenants, because he meant to force them out of the house if he could. It didn't look very promising from here. The man went first. He was tall and dark, and he wore his clothes and carried his body with that peculiar, arrogant assurance that comes from perfect confidence in every phase of one's being. Two women were laughing as they followed him. Their voices were light and sweet, and their faces were beautiful, each in its own exotic way. But the first thing Oliver thought of when he looked at them was expensive. It was not only that patina of perfection that seemed to dwell in every line of their incredibly flawless garments. There are degrees of wealth beyond which wealth itself ceases to have significance. Oliver had seen before, on rare occasions, something like this assurance that the earth turning beneath their well-shod feet turned only to their whim. It puzzled him a little in this case, because he had the feeling, as the three came up the walk, that the beautiful clothing they wore so confidently was not clothing they were accustomed to. There was a curious air of condescension in the way they moved, like women in costume. They minced a little on their delicate high heels, held out an arm to stare at the cut of a sleeve, twisted now and then inside their garments, as if the clothing sat strangely on them, as if they were accustomed to something entirely different. And there was an elegance about the way the garments fitted them, which even Oliver looked strikingly unusual. Only an actress on the screen who can stop time and the film to adjust every disarrayed fold so that she looks perpetually perfect might appear this elegantly clad. But let these women move as they liked, and each fold of their clothing followed perfectly with the movement, and fell perfectly into place again. One might almost suspect the garments were not cut of ordinary cloth, or that they were cut according to some unknown, subtle scheme, with many artful hidden seams placed by a tailor incredibly skilled at his trade. They seemed excited. They talked in high, clear, and sweet voices, looking up at the perfect blue and transparent sky in which dawn was still frankly pink. They looked at the trees on the lawn, the leaves translucently green with an undercolor of golden newness, the edges crimped from constriction in the recent bud. Happily, and with excitement in their voices, they called to the man, and when he answered, his own voice blended so perfectly in cadence with theirs that it sounded like three people singing together. Their voices, like their clothing, seemed to have an elegance far beyond the ordinary, to be under a control such as Oliver Wilson had never dreamed of before this morning. The taxi driver brought up the luggage, which was of a beautiful pale stuff that did not look quite like leather, and had curves in it so subtle it seemed square until you saw how two or three of the pieces fitted together when carried, or into a perfect balanced block. It was scuffed, as if from much use, and though there was a great deal of it, the taxman did not seem to find his burden heavy. Oliver saw him look down at it now and then, and heft the weight incredulously. One of the women had very black hair and skin like cream, and smoke blue eyes heavily lidded with the weight of her lashes. It was the other woman Oliver's gaze followed as she came up the walk. Her hair was a clear, pale red, and her face had a softness that he thought would be like velvet to the touch. She was tanned to a warm amber darker than her hair. Just as they reached the porch steps, the fair woman lifted her head and looked up. She gazed straight into Oliver's eyes, and he saw that hers were very blue and just a little amused, as if she had known he was there all along. Also, they were frankly admiring. Feeling a bit dizzy, Oliver hurried back to his room to dress. "We are here on vacation," the dark man said, accepting the keys. "We will not wish to be disturbed, as I have made clear in our correspondence. You have engaged a cook and a housemaid for us, I understand. We will expect you to move your own belongings out of the house then, and—" "Wait," Oliver said uncomfortably. "Something's come up. He hesitated, not sure just how to present it. These were such increasingly odd people. Even their speech was odd. They spoke so distinctly, not slurring any of the words into contraction. English seemed as familiar to them as a native tongue, but they all spoke as trained singers sing, with perfect breath control and voice placement. And there was a coldness in the man's voice, as if some gulf lay between him and Oliver, so deep no feeling of human contact could bridge it. "I wonder," Oliver said, "if I could find you better living quarters somewhere else in town. There's a place across the street that—" The dark woman said, "Oh, no," in a lightly horrified voice, and all three of them laughed. It was a cool, distant laughter that did not include Oliver. The dark man said, "We chose this house carefully, Mr. Wilson. We will not be interested in living anywhere else." Oliver said desperately, "I don't see why. It isn't even a modern house. I have two others in much better condition. Even across the street you'd have a fine view of the city. Here there isn't anything. The other house has cut off all the view, and—" "We engaged the rooms here, Mr. Wilson," the man said with finality. "We expect to use them. Now will you make arrangements to leave as soon as possible?" Oliver said, "No," and looked stubborn. "That isn't in the lease. You can find here until next month, since you paid for it, but you can't put me out. I'm staying." The man opened his mouth to say something. He looked coldly at Oliver and closed it again. The feeling of aloofness was chill between them. There was a moment's silence. Then the man said, "Very well, be kind enough to stay out of our way." It was a little odd that he didn't inquire into Oliver's motives. Oliver was not yet sure enough of the man to explain. He couldn't very well say, since the lease was signed, I've been offered the 3 times what the house is worth if I sell it before the end of May. He couldn't say, I want the money and I'm going to use my own nuisance value to annoy you until you're willing to move out. After all, there seemed no reason why they shouldn't. After seeing them, there seemed doubly no reason, for it was clear they must be accustomed to surroundings infinitely better than this time-worn old house. It was very strange, the value this house had so suddenly acquired. There was no reason at all why 2 groups of semi-anonymous people should be so eager to possess it for the month of May. In silence, Oliver showed his tenants upstairs to the 3 big bedrooms across the front of the house. He was intensely conscious of the red-haired woman and the way she watched him with a sort of obvious covert interest, quite warmly and with a curious undertone to her interest that he could not quite place. It was familiar but elusive. He thought how pleasant it would be to talk to her alone, if only to try to capture that elusive attitude and put a name to it. Afterward, he went down to the telephone and called his fiancée, whose voice squeaked a little with excitement over the wire. Oliver? So early? Why, it's hardly 6 yet. Did you tell them what I said? Are they going to go? Can't tell yet. I doubt it. After all, Sue, I did take their money, you know. Oliver, they've got to go. You've got to do something. I'm trying, Sue, but I don't like it. Well, there isn't any reason why they shouldn't stay somewhere else, and we're going to need that money. You'll just have to think of something, Oliver. Oliver met his own worried eyes in the mirror above the telephone and scowled at himself. His straw-colored hair was tangled, and there was a shiny stubble on his pleasant, tanned face. He was sorry the red-haired woman had first seen him in his untidy condition. Then his conscience smote him at the sound of Sue's determined voice, and he said, I'll try, darling, I'll try, but I did take their money. They had, in fact, paid a great deal of money, considerably more than the rooms were worth even in that year of high prices and high wages. The country was just moving into one of those fabulous eras which are later referred to as the gay 40s or the golden 60s, a pleasant period of national euphoria. It was a stimulating time to be alive, while it lasted. All right, Oliver said resignedly. I'll do my best. But he was conscious, as the next few days went by, that he was not doing his best. There were several reasons for that. From the beginning, the idea of making himself a nuisance to his tenants had been Sue's, not Oliver's. And if Oliver had been a little less determined, the whole project never would have gotten underway. Reason was on Sue's side, but, for one thing, the tenants were so fascinated. All they said and did had a queer sort of inversion to it, as if a mirror had been held up to an ordinary living, and in the reflection showed as strange variations from the norm. Their minds worked on a different basic premise, Oliver thought, from his own. They seemed to derive covert amusement from the most unamusing things. They patronized, they were aloof with a quality of cold detachment which did not prevent them from laughing inexplicably far too often for Oliver's comfort. He saw them occasionally on their way to and from their rooms. They were polite and distant, not, he suspected, from anger at his presence, but from sheer indifference. Most of the day they spent out of the house. The perfect May weather held unbroken, and they seemed to give themselves up wholeheartedly to admiration of it, either confident that the warm, pale golden sunshine and the scented air would not be interrupted by rain or cold. They were so sure of it that Oliver felt uneasy. They took only one meal a day in the house, a late dinner, and their reactions to the meal were unpredictable. Laughter greeted some of the dishes, and sort of delicate disgust others. No one would touch the salad, for instance, and the fish seemed to cause a wave of queer embarrassment around the table. They dressed elaborately for each dinner. The man, his name was O'Mary, looked extremely handsome in his dinner clothes, but he seemed a little sulky, and Oliver twice heard the women laughing because he had to wear black. Oliver entertained a sudden vision, for no reason, of the man in garments as bright and as subtly cut as the women's, and it seemed somehow very right for him. He wore even the dark clothing with a certain flamboyance, as if a cloth of gold would be more normal for him. When they were in the house at other meal times, they ate in their rooms. They must have brought a great deal of food with them from whatever mysterious place they had come. Oliver wondered with increased curiosity where it might be. Delicious odors drifted into the hall sometimes, at odd hours, from the closed doors. Oliver could not identify them, but almost always they smelled irresistible. A few times the food smell was rather shockingly unpleasant, almost nauseating. It takes a connoisseur, Oliver reflected, to appreciate the decadent, and these people most certainly were connoisseurs. Why they lived so contentedly in this huge ramshackle old house was a question that disturbed his dreams at night, or why they refused to move. He caught some fascinating glimpses into their rooms, which appeared to have been changed almost completely by additions he could not have defined very clearly from the bright sights he had of them. The feeling of luxury which his first glance at them had evoked was confirmed by the richness of the hangings they had apparently brought with them, the half-glimpsed ornaments, the pictures on the walls, even the whiffs of exotic perfume that floated from half-open doors. He saw the women go by him in the halls, moving softly through the brown dimness in their gowns, so uncannily perfect in fit, so lusciously rich, so glowingly colored, they seemed unreal. That poise, born of confidence in the subservience of the world, gave them an imperious aloofness. But more than once, Oliver, meeting the blue gaze of the woman with the red hair and the soft tanned skin, thought he saw a quickened interest there. She smiled at him in the dimness, and went by in a haze of fragrance and a halo of incredible richness, and the warmth of the smile lingered after she had gone. He knew she did not mean this aloofness to last between them. From the very first he was sure of that. When the time came, she would make the opportunity to be alone with him. The thought was confusing and tremendously exciting. There was nothing he could do but wait, knowing she would see him when it suited her. On the third day, he lunched with Sue in a little downtown restaurant overlooking the great sweep of the metropolis across the river far below. Sue had shining brown curls and brown eyes, and her chin was a bit more prominent than is strictly accordant with beauty. From childhood, Sue had known what she wanted and how to get it, and it seemed to Oliver just now that she had never wanted anything quite so much as the sale of this house. "It's such a marvelous offer for the old mausoleum," she said, breaking into a roll with a gesture of violence. "We'll never have a chance like that again, and prices are so high we'll need the money to start housekeeping. Surely you can do something, Oliver." "I'm trying," Oliver assured her uncomfortably. "Have you heard anything more from that madwoman who wants to buy it?" Oliver shook his head. "Her attorney phoned again yesterday. Nothing new. I wonder who she is." "I don't even think the attorney knows. All this mystery. I don't like it, Oliver. Even those San Francisco people. What did they do today?" Oliver laughed. "They spent about an hour this morning telephoning movie theaters in the city, checking up on a lot of third-rate films they want to see parts of." "Parts of? But why?" "I don't know. I think... oh, nothing. More coffee?" The trouble was, he thought he did know. It was too unlikely a guest to tell Sue about, and without familiarity with the San Francisco oddities, she would only think Oliver was losing his mind. But he had, from their talk, a definite impression that there was an actor in bit parts in all these films whose performances they mentioned with something very near to awe. They referred to him as Golconda, which didn't appear to be his name, so that Oliver had no way of guessing which obscure bit player it was they admired so deeply. Golconda might have been the name of a character he had once played, and with superlative skill, judging by the comments of the San Franciscos, but to Oliver it meant nothing at all. "They do funny things. said, stirring his coffee reflectively. Yesterday, O'Mary, that's the man, came in with a book of poems published about 5 years ago, and all of them handled it like a first edition of Shakespeare. I never even heard of the author, but he seems to be a tin god in their country, wherever that is. You still don't know? Haven't they even dropped any hints? We don't do much talking, Oliver reminded her with some irony. I know, but, oh, well, I guess it doesn't matter. Go on, what else did they do? Well, this morning they were going to spend studying Golconda and his great art, and this afternoon I think they're taking a trip up the river to some sort of shrine I've never heard of. It isn't very far, wherever it is, because I know they're coming back for dinner. Some great man's birthplace, I think. They promised to take home souvenirs of the place if they could get any. They're typical tourists, all right. If I could only figure out what's behind the whole thing. It doesn't make sense. Nothing about that house makes sense anymore. I do wish. She went on in a petulant voice, but Oliver ceased suddenly to hear her, because just outside the door, walking with imperial elegance on her high heels, a familiar figure passed. He did not see her face, but he thought he would know that poise, that richness of line and motion anywhere on earth. "Excuse me a minute," he muttered to Sue, and was out of his chair before she could speak. He made the door in half a dozen long strides, and the beautifully elegant passer-by was only a few steps away when he got there. Then, with the words he had meant to speak already half uttered, he fell silent and stood there staring. It was not the red-haired woman. It was not her companion. It was a stranger. He watched, speechless, while the lovely, imperious creature moved on through the crowd and vanished, moving with familiar poise and assurance, and an equally familiar strangeness, as if the beautiful and exquisitely fitted garments she wore were an exotic costume to her, as they had always seemed to the San Cisco woman. Every other woman on the street looked untidy and ill at ease beside her. Walking like a queen, she melted into the crowd and was gone. She came from their country, Oliver told himself dizzily. So someone else nearby had mysterious tenants in this month of perfect May weather. Someone else was puzzling in vain today over the strangeness of the people from the nameless land. Silence, he went back to Sue. The door stood invitingly ajar in the brown dimness of the upper hall. Oliver's steps slowed as he drew near it, and his heart began to quicken correspondingly. It was a red-haired woman's room, and he thought the door was not open by accident. Her name, he knew now, was Clef. The door creaked a little on its hinges, and from within a very sweet voice said lazily, "Won't you come in?" The room looked very different indeed. The big bed had been pushed back against the wall, and a cover thrown over it that brushed the floor all around looked like a soft-haired fur, except that it was pale blue-green and sparkled as if every hair were tipped with invisible crystals. 3 books lay open on the fur, and a very curious-looking magazine with faintly luminous printing, and a page of pictures that at first glance appeared three-dimensional. Also a tiny porcelain pipe encrusted with porcelain flowers, and a thin wisp of smoke floating from the bowl. Above the bed a broad picture hung, framing a square of blue water so real Oliver had to look twice to be sure it was not rippling gently from left to right. From the ceiling swung a golden globe on a glass cord. It turned gently, the light from the windows making curved rectangles in its sides. Under the central window a sort of chase long stood where Oliver had not seen before. He could only assume it was at least partially pneumatic, and had been brought in the luggage. There was a very rich-looking quilted cloth covering, and hiding it, embossed all over in shiny metallic patterns. Clef moved slowly from the door and sank upon the chaise lounge with a little sigh of content. The couch accommodated itself to her body with what looked like delightful comfort. Clef wriggled a little and then smiled up at Oliver. "Do come on in. Sit over there where you can see out the window. I love your beautiful spring weather. You know, there never was a May like it in civilized times." She said that quite seriously, her blue eyes on Oliver's, and there was a hint of patronage in her voice, as if the weather had been arranged especially for her. Oliver started across the room and then paused and looked down in amazement at the floor, which felt unstable. He had not noticed before that the carpet was pure white, unspotted, and sank about an inch under the pressure of the feet. He saw then that Clef's feet were bare, or almost bare. She wore something like gossamer buskins of filmy net, fitting her feet exactly. The bare soles were pink as if they'd been rouged, and they all had a liquid gleam like tiny mirrors. He moved closer and was not as surprised as he should have been to see that they really were tiny mirrors, painted with some lacquer that gave them reflecting surfaces. "Do sit down," Clef said again, waving a white-sleeved arm toward a chair by the window. She wore a garment that looked like short, soft down, loosely cut, but following perfectly every motion she made. And there was something curiously different about her very shape today. When Oliver saw her in street clothes, she had the square-shouldered, slim-flanked figure that all women strove for. But here, in her lounging robe, she looked, well, different. There was an almost swan-like slope to her shoulders today, a roundness and softness to her body that looked unfamiliar and very appealing. "Will you have some tea?" Clef asked, and smiled charmingly. A low table beside her held a tray and several small covered cups, lovely things with an inner glow like rose quartz, the color shining deeply as if from within layer upon layer of translucent. She took one of the cups, there were no saucers, and offered it to Oliver. It felt fragile and thin as paper in his hand. He could not see the contents because of the cup's cover, which seemed to be the one of the cup itself, and left only a thin open crescent at the rim. Steam rose from the opening. Clef took up a cup of her own and tilted it to her lips, smiling at Oliver over the rim. She was very beautiful. The pale red hair lay in shining loops against her head, and the corona of pearls like a halo above her forehead might have been pressed down like a wreath. Every hair kept order as perfectly as if it had been painted on, though the breeze from the window stirred now and then among the softly shining strands. Oliver tried the tea. Its flavor was exquisite, very hot, and the taste was lingered upon his tongue, was like a scent of flowers. It was an extremely feminine drink. He sipped again, surprised to find how much he liked it. The scent of flowers seemed to increase as he drank, swirling through his head like smoke. After the third sip, there was a faint buzzing in his ears. The bees among the flowers, perhaps, he thought incoherently, and sipped again. Clef watched him, smiling. "The others will be out all afternoon," she told Oliver comfortably. "I thought it would give us a pleasant time to be acquainted." Oliver was rather horrified to hear him saying, "What makes you talk like that?" He had no idea of asking the question. Something seemed to have loosened his control over his own tongue. Clef's smile deepened. She tipped the cup to her lips, and there was indulgence in her voice when she said, "What do you mean, like that?" He waved his hand vaguely, noting with some surprise that at a glance it seemed to have 6 or 7 fingers as it moved past his face. "I don't know. Precision, I guess. Why don't you say don't, for instance?" "In our country we are trained to speak with precision," Clef explained, "just as we are trained to move and dress and think with precision. Any slovenliness is trained out of us in childhood. With you, of course," he was polite, "with you this does not happen to be a national fetish. With us we have time for the amenities. We like them." Her voice had grown sweeter and sweeter as she spoke, until by now it was almost indistinguishable from the sweetness of the flower scent in Oliver's head and the delicate flavor of the tea. "What country do you come from?" he asked, and tilted the cup again to drink, mildly surprised to notice that it seemed inexhaustible. Clef's smile was definitely patronizing this time. It didn't irritate him. Nothing could irritate him just now. The whole room swam in a beautiful rosy glow as fragrant as the flowers. "We must not speak of that, Mr. Wilson." "But—" Oliver paused. After all, it was of course none of his business. "This is a vacation?" he asked vaguely. Call it a pilgrimage, perhaps. Pilgrimage? Oliver was so interested that for an instant his mind came back into sharp focus. So what? I should not have said that, Mr. Wilson. Please forget it. Do you like the tea? Very much. You will have guessed by now that it is not only tea, but a euphoric. Oliver stared. A euphoric? Clef made a descriptive circle in the air with one graceful hand and laughed. You do not feel the effects yet. Surely you do. I feel, Oliver said, the way I'd feel after 4 whiskeys. Clef shuddered delicately. We get our euphoria less painfully, and without the after effects your barbarous alcohols used to have. She bit her lip. Sorry, I must be euphoric myself to speak so freely. Please forgive me. Shall we have some music? Clef leaned backward on the chaise lounge and reached towards the wall beside her. Sleeve falling away from her round, tan arm, left bare at the inside of the wrist, and Oliver was startled to see there was a long, rosy streak of a fading scar. His inhibitions had dissolved in the fumes of the fragrant tea. He caught his breath and leaned forward to stare. Clef shook the sleeve back over the scar with a quick gesture. Color came into her face beneath the softly tinted tan, and she would not meet Oliver's eyes. A queer shame seemed to have fallen upon her. Oliver said tactlessly, What is it? What's the matter? Still, she would not look at him. Much later he understood that shame and knew she had reason for it. Now he listened blankly as she said, Nothing. Nothing at all. An inoculation. All of us. Oh, never mind. Listen to the music. This time she reached out with the other arm. Touched nothing, but when she had held her hand near the wall, a sound breathed through the room. It was the sound of water, the sighing of waves receding upon long-sloped beaches. Oliver followed Clef's gaze towards a picture of that blue water above the bed. The waves there were moving. More than that, the point of vision moved. Slowly the seascape drifted past, moving with the waves, following them toward shore. Oliver watched, half hypnotized by a motion that seemed, at the time, quite acceptable and not in the least surprising. The waves lifted and broke in creaming foam and ran seething up a sandy beach. Then through the sound of the water, music began to breathe, and through the water itself, a man face dawned in the frame, smiling intimately into the room. He held an oddly archaic musical instrument, loop-shaped, its body striped light and dark like a melon, and its long neck bent back over his shoulder. He was singing, and Oliver felt mildly astonished at the song. It was very familiar and very odd indeed. He groped to the unfamiliar rhythms and found at last a thread to catch the tune by. It was Make-Believe from Showboat, but certainly a showboat that had never steamed up the Mississippi. What's he doing to it? He demanded after a few moments of outraged listening. I'd never heard anything like it. Clef laughed and stretched out her arm again. Enigmatically, she said, We call it kyling. Never mind. How do you like this? It was a comedian, a man in semi-clown makeup, his eyes exaggerated so that they seemed to cover half his face. He stood by a broad glass pillar before a dark curtain and sang a gay staccato song, interspersed with patter that sounded impromptu, and all the while his left hand did an intricate musical tattoo of the nail tips on the glass of the column. He strolled round and around it as he sang. The rhythms of his fingernails blended with the song and swung wildly away into patterns of their own, and blended again without a break. It was confusing to follow. The song made even less sense than the monologue, which had something to do with the lost slipper and was full of allusions which made Clef smile, but were utterly unintelligible to Oliver. The man had a dry, brittle style that was not very amusing, though Clef seemed fascinated. Oliver was interested to see in him an extension and a variation of that extreme, smooth confidence which marked all three of the San Ciscos. Clearly a racial trait, he thought. Other performances followed, some of them fragmentary as if lifted out of a completion or version. One he knew. The obvious, stirring melody struck his recognition before the figures, marching men against the haze, a great banner rolling backward above them in the smoke, foreground figures striding gigantically and shouting in rhythm, "Forward, forward, the lily banners go!" The music was tinny, the images blurred and poorly colored, but there was a gusto about the performance that caught at Oliver's imagination. He stared, remembering the old film from long ago. Dennis King and a ragged chorus singing the Song of the Vagabonds from, was it Vagabond King? A very old one, Cliff said apologetically, but I like it. The steam of the intoxicating tea swirled between Oliver and the picture. Music swelled and sank through the room, and the fragrant fumes in his own euphoric brain. Nothing seemed strange. He had discovered how to drink the tea. Like nitrous oxide, the effect was not cumulative. When you reached a peak of euphoria, you could not increase the peak. It was best to wait for a slight dip in the effect of the stimulant before taking more. Otherwise, it had most of the effects of alcohol. Everything after a while dissolved into a delightful fog through which all he saw was a uniformly enchanting and partook of the qualities of a dream. He questioned nothing. Afterwards, he was not certain how much of it he really had dreamed. There was the dancing doll, for instance. He remembered it quite clearly, in sharp focus. A tiny, slender woman with a long nose, dark-eyed face, and pointed chin. She moved delicately across the white rug, knee-high, exquisite. Her features were as mobile as her body, and she danced lightly with resounding strokes of her toes, each echoing like a bell. It was a formalized sort of dance, and she sang breathlessly in accompaniment, making amusing little grimaces. Certainly it was a portrait doll, animated to mimic the original perfectly in voice and motion. Afterward, Oliver knew he must have dreamed it. What else happened, he was quite unable to remember later. He knew Clef had said some curious things, but they all made sense at the time, and afterwards he could not remember a word. He knew he had been offered a little glittering candies in a transparent dish, and that some of them had been delicious, and one or two so bitter his tongue still curled the next day when she recalled them. And one, Clef sucked luxuriantly on the same kind, of a taste that was actively nauseating. As for Clef herself, he was frantically uncertain the next day what had really happened. He thought he could remember the softness of her white downed arms clasped at the back of his neck while she laughed up at him and exhaled into his face the flowery fragrance of the tea. But beyond that, he was totally unable to recall anything for a while. There was a brief interlude later, for the oblivion of sleep. He was almost sure he remembered a moment when the other two San Ciscos stood looking down at him, the man scowling, the smoky-eyed woman smiling a derisive smile. The man said from a vast distance, "Clef, you know this is against every rule." His voice began in a thin hum and soared in fantastic flight beyond the range of hearing. Oliver thought he remembered the dark woman's laughter, thin and distant too, and the hum of her voice like bees in flight. "Clef, Clef, you silly little fool, can we never trust you out of sight?" Clef's voice then said something that seemed to make no sense. "What does it matter here?" The man answered in that buzzing, faraway hum. "The matter of giving you bond before you leave, not to interfere. You know you signed the rules." Clef's voice, nearer and more intelligible. "You hear the difference is, it does not matter here. You both know that. How could it matter?" Oliver felt the downy brush of her sleeve against his cheek, but he saw nothing again except the slow, smoke-like ebb and flow of darkness past his eyes. He heard the voices wrangle musically from far away, and he heard them cease. When he woke the next morning, alone in his own room, he woke with the memory of Clef's eyes upon him very sorrowfully, her lovely tanned face looking down on him with the red hair falling fragrantly on each side of it, and sadness and compassion in her eyes. He thought he had probably dreamed that. There was no reason why anyone should look at him with such sadness. Sue telephoned that day. Oliver, the people who want to buy the house are here. That mad woman and her husband. Shall I bring them over? Oliver's mind all day had been hazy with the vague, bewildering memories of yesterday. Beth's face kept floating before him, blotting out the room. He said, "What? I... Oh, well, bring them if you want to. I don't see what good it'll do." "Oliver, what's wrong with you? We agreed we needed the money, didn't we? I don't see how you can think of passing up such a wonderful bargain without even a struggle. We could get married and buy our own house right away, and you know we'll never get such an offer again for that old trash heap. Wake up, Oliver." Oliver made an effort. "I know, Sue. I know. But, Oliver, you got to think of something." Her voice was imperious. He knew she was right. Clef or no clef, the bargain shouldn't be ignored if there was any way at all of getting the tenants out. He wondered again what made the place so suddenly priceless to so many people, and what the last week in May had to do with the value of the house. A sudden sharp curiosity pierced even the vagueness of his mind today. May's last week was so important that the whole sale of the house stood or fell upon occupancy by then. Why? Why? "What's going to happen next week?" he asked rhetorically of the telephone. "Why can't they wait until these people leave? I'd knock a couple thousand off the price if they—" "You would not, Oliver Wilson. I can buy all our refrigeration units with that extra money. You'll just have to work out some way to give possession by next week, and that's that. You hear me?" "Keep your shirt on," Oliver said practically. "I'm only human, but I'll try." "I'm bringing the people over right away," Sue told him, "while the Franciscos are still out. Now you put your mind to work and think of something, Oliver." She paused, and her voice was reflective when she spoke again. "They're awfully odd people, darling." "Odd? You'll see." It was an elderly woman and a very young man who trailed Sue up the walk. Oliver knew immediately what had struck Sue about them. He was somehow not at all surprised to see that both wore their clothing with the familiar air of elegant self-consciousness he'd come to know so well. They, too, looked around them at the beautiful sunny afternoon with conscious enjoyment and at an air of faint condescension. He knew, before he heard them speak, how musical their voices would be and how meticulous they would pronounce each word. There were no doubt about it. The people of Clef's mysterious country were arriving here in force. For something. For the last week of May? He shrugged mentally. There's no way of guessing. One thing only was sure. All of them must come from that nameless land where people controlled their voices like singers, and their garments like actors who would stop the reel of time itself to adjust every disordered fold. The elderly woman took her full charge of the conversation from the start. They stood together on the rickety, unpainted porch, and Sue had no chance even for introduction. "Young man, I am Madame Hofflia. This is my husband." Her voice had an underrunning current of harshness, which was perhaps age, and her face looked almost corseted. The loose flesh coerced into something like firmness, but some invisible method Oliver could not guess at. The makeup was so skillful, he could not be certain it was makeup at all, but he had a definite feeling that she was much older than she looked. It would have taken a lifetime of command to put so much authority into a harsh, deep, musically controlled voice. The young man said nothing. He was very handsome. His type, apparently, was one that does not change much no matter in what culture or country it may occur. He wore beautifully tailored garments and carried in one gloved hand a box of red leather about the size and shape of a book. Madame Hollia went on. "I understand your problem about the house. You wish to sell it to me, but are legally bound by your lease with O'Mary and his friends. Is that right?" Oliver nodded. "But let me finish. If O'Mary can be forced to vacate before next week, you'll accept our offer, right?" "Very well. Huh?" He nodded to the young man beside her. He jumped to instant attention, bowed slightly, and said, "Yes, Hollia," and slipped a gloved hand into his coat. Madame Holly took the little object offered out her palm, did a gesture as she reached for it, almost imperial, as if royal robes swept from her outstretched arm. Here, she said, is something that may help us, my dear. She held it out to Sue. If you can hide this somewhere about the house, I believe your unwelcome tenants will not trouble you much longer. Sue took the thing curiously. It looked like a tiny silver box, no more than an inch square, indented at the top and with no line to show it could be opened. Wait a minute, Oliver broke in uneasily. What is it? Nothing that'll harm anyone, I assure you. Then what? Madame Holly's imperious gesture at one sweep silenced him and commanded Sue forward. Go on, my dear, hurry before Mary comes back. I can assure you there is no danger to anyone. Oliver broke in determinedly. Madame Holly, I'll have to know what your plans are. Oh, Oliver, please. Sue's fingers closed over the silver cube. Don't worry about it. I'm sure Madame Holly knows best. Don't you want to get these people out? Of course I do, but I don't want the house blown up, or Madame Holly's deep laughter was indulgent. Nothing so crude, I promise you, Mr. Wilson. Remember, we want the house. Hurry, my dear. Sue nodded and slipped hastily past Oliver into the hall. Outnumbered, he subsided uneasily. The young man, Hara, tapped a negligent foot and admired the sunlight as they waited. It was an afternoon as perfect as all of May had been, translucent gold, balmy with an edge of chill lingering in the air to point up a perfect contrast with the summer to come. Hara looked around him confidently, like a man paying just tribute to a stage set provided wholly for himself. He even glanced up at a drone from above and followed the course of a big transcontinental plane, half dissolved in a golden haze high in the sun. Quaint, he murmured in a gratified voice. Sue came back and slipped her hand through Oliver's arm, squeezed excitedly. There, she said. How long will it take, Madame Holly? That will depend, my dear. Not very long. Now, Mr. Wilson, one word with you. You live here also, understand. For your own comfort, take my advice, and somewhere within the house a door slammed, and a clear, high voice rang wordlessly up a rippling scale. Then there was the sound of feet on the stairs, and a single line of song. Come hider, love to me. Horace started, almost dropping the red leather box he held. Clef, he said in a whisper, or Keel. I know they both just came on from Canterbury, but I thought... Hush. Madame Hollier's features composed themselves into an imperious blank. She breathed triumphantly through her nose, drew back upon herself, and turned an imposing facade to the door. Clef wore the same softly downy robe Oliver had seen before, except today that it was not white, but a pale, clear blue that gave her tan an apricot flush. She was smiling. Why, Hollia! Her tone was at its most musical. I thought I recognized voices from home. How nice to see you. No one knew you were coming to the... She broke off and glanced at Oliver and then away again. Hara, too, she said. What a pleasant surprise. She said flatly. When did you get back? Clef smiled at her. You must be the little Miss Johnson. Why, I did not go out at all. I was tired of sightseeing. I've been napping in my room. She drew in her breath in something that just escaped being a disbelieving sniff. A look flashed between the two women, and for an instant held. And that instant was timeless. It was an extraordinary pause in which a great deal of wordless interplay took place in the space of a second. Oliver saw the quality of Clef's smile at Sue, that same look of quiet confidence he had noticed so often about all of these strange people. He saw Sue's quick inventory of the other woman, and he saw how Sue squared her shoulders and stood up straight, smoothing down her summer frock over her flat hips so that for an instant she stood posed consciously, looking down on Clef. It was deliberate. Bewildered, he glanced again at Clef. Clef's shoulders sloped softly. Her robe was belted to a tiny waist and hung in deep folds over frankly rounded hips. Sue's was the fashionable figure, but Sue was the first to surrender. Clef's smile did not falter, but in the silence there was an abrupt reversal of values based on no more than the measureless quality of Clef's confidence in herself. The quiet, assured smile. It was suddenly made very clear that fashion is not a constant. Clef's curious, out-of-mode curves without warning became the norm, and Sue was a queer, angular, half-masculine creature beside her. Oliver had no idea how it was done. Somehow the authority passed in a breath from one woman to the other. Beauty is almost wholly a matter of fashion. What is beautiful today would have been grotesque a couple of generations ago, and will be grotesque 100 years ahead. It will be worse than grotesque. It will be outmoded and therefore faintly ridiculous. Sue was that. Clef had only to exert her authority to make it clear to everyone on the porch. Clef was a beauty, suddenly and very convincingly, beautiful in the accepted mode, and Sue was amusingly old-fashioned, an anachronism in her lithe, square-shouldered slimness. She did not belong. She was grotesque among these strangely immaculate people. Sue's collapse was complete, but pride sustained her and bewilderment. Probably she never did grasp entirely what was wrong. She gave Clef one glance of burning resentment, and when her eyes came back to Oliver, there was suspicion in them and mistrust. Looking backward later, Oliver thought that in that moment, for the first time clearly, he began to suspect the truth. But he had no time to ponder it, for after the brief instant of enmity, the three people from elsewhere began to speak all at once, as if in a belated attempt to cover something they did not want noticed. Clef said, "This beautiful weather," and Madame Hollia said, "So fortunate to have this house," and Hara, holding up the red leather box, said loudest of all, "Sinby sent you this, Clef. His latest." Clef put out both hands for it eagerly, the eider-down sleeves falling back from her rounded arms. Oliver had a quick glimpse of that mysterious scar before the sleeve fell back, and it seemed to him that there was the faintest trace of a similar scar vanishing into Hara's cuff as he let his own arm drop. "Sinby!" Clef cried, her voice high and sweet and delighted. "How wonderful! What period?" "From November, 1664," Hara said. "London, of course, though I think there may be some counterpoint from the 1347 November. He hasn't finished, of course." He glanced almost nervously at Oliver and Sue. "A wonderful example," he said quickly. "Marvelous, if you have the taste for it, of course." Madame Hollia shuddered with ponderous delicacy. "That man," she said. "Fascinating, of course. A great man, but so advanced." "It takes a connoisseur to appreciate Sinby's work fully," Clef said in a slightly tart voice. "We all admit that." "Oh, yes, we all bow to Sinby," Hollia conceded. "I confess that man terrifies me a little, my dear. Do we expect him to join us?" "I suppose so," Clef said. "If his work is not yet finished, then of course. You know Sinby's tastes." Hollis and Hera laughed together. "I know when I look for him, then," Hollis said. She glanced at the staring Oliver and the subdued but angry Sue, and with a commanding effort brought the subject back into fine. "So fortunate, my dear Clef, to have this house," she declared heavily. "I saw a tridimensional of it afterward, and it was still quite perfect. Such a fortunate coincidence. Would you consider parting with your lease, for consideration, say a coronation seat at—" "Nothing could buy us, Hollia," Clef told her gaily, clasping the red box to her bosom. Hollia gave her a cool stare. "You may change your mind, my dear Clef," she said pontificatingly. "There is still time. You could always reach us through Mr. Wilson here. We have rooms up the out and out." Oliver recognized these basics to the sounds in a very brief moment. They were essentials, and they seemed to beat into his brain with the first strains of the music, which was so much more than the music. But when he lifted his head to listen, he lost all grasp upon the meaning of the noise, and it was sheer medley and confusion. To think of it was to blur it hopelessly in the mind, and he could not recapture that first instant of unreasoning acceptance. He went upstairs almost in a daze, hardly knowing what he was doing. He pushed Clef's door open. He looked inside. And I think I got a page missing there. What he saw there he could not afterward remember, except in a blurring as vague as the blurred idea the music roused in his brain. See, and I'm just as blurred as if I forgot a page, which I think I did. Half the room had vanished behind a mist, and the mist was a three-dimensional screen upon which were projected. He had no words for them. He was not even sure if projections were visible. The mist was spinning with motion and sound, but essentially it was neither sound nor motion that Oliver saw. This was a work of art. Oliver knew no name for it. It transcended all art forms he knew, blended them, and out of the blend produced subtleties his mind could not begin to grasp. Basically, this was an attempt of a master composer to correlate every essential aspect of a vast human experience into something that could be conveyed in a few moments to every sense at once. The shifting visions on the screen were not pictures in themselves, but hints of pictures, subtly selected outlines that plucked at the mind and with one deft touch set whole chords ringing through the memory. Perhaps each beholder reacted differently, since it was the eye and the mind of the beholder that the truth of the picture lay. No two would be aware of the same symphonic panorama, but each would essentially the same terrible story unfold. Every sense was touched by that deft and merciless genius. Color and shape and motion flickered in the screen, hinting much, evoking unbearable memories deep in the mind. Odors floating from the screen and touched the heart of the beholder more poignantly than anything visual could do. The skin crawled sometimes as if to a tangible cold hand laid upon it. The tongue curled with remembered bitterness and remembered sweet. It was outrageous. It violated the innermost privacy of a man's mind, called up secret things long ago walled off behind mental scar tissue, forced its terrible message upon the beholder relentlessly to the mind, might threaten to crack beneath the stress of it. And yet, in spite of all this vivid awareness, Oliver did not know what calamity the screen portrayed. That it was real, vast, overwhelmingly dreadful, he could not doubt. That it had once happened was unmistakable. He caught flashing glimpses of human faces distorted with grief and disease and death, real faces, faces that had once lived and were seen now in the instant of dying. He saw men and women in rich clothing superimposed in panorama upon reeling thousands of ragged folk. Great throngs of them swept past the sight in an instant, and he saw that death made no distinction among them. He saw lovely women laugh and shake their curls, and laughter shriek into hysteria, and the hysteria into music. He saw one man's face, over and over, a long, dark, saturnine face, deep blue lined, sorrowful, the face of a powerful man, wise in worldliness, urbane, and helpless. The face was for a while a recurring motif, always more tortured, more helpless than before. The music broke off in the midst of a rising glide. The mist vanished, and the room reappeared before him. The anguished dark face, for instance, seemed to Oliver printed everywhere he looked, like after vision on the eyelids. He knew that face. He had seen it before, not often, but he should know its name. Oliver, Oliver! Clef's sweet voice came out of the fog at him. He was leaning dizzily against the doorpost, looking down into her eyes. She, too, had that dazed blankness he must show on his own face. The power of the dreadful symphony still held them both, but even in this confused moment Oliver saw that Clef had been enjoying the experience. He felt sickened to the depths of his mind, dizzy with sickness and revulsion because of the superimposing of human miseries he had just beheld. But Clef, only appreciation showed upon her face. To her it had been magnificence, and magnificence only. Irrelevantly, Oliver remembered the nauseating candies she had enjoyed, the nauseating odors of strange foods that drifted sometimes through the hall from her room. What was it she had said downstairs a little while ago? Connoisseur, that was it. Only a connoisseur could appreciate work as advanced as the work of someone called Simbi. A whiff of intoxicating sweetness curled past Oliver's face. Something cool and smooth was pressed into his hand. "Oh, Oliver, I am so sorry," Clef's voice murmured contritely. "Here, drink the euphoric and you'll feel better. Please drink." The familiar fragrance of the hot sweet tea was on his tongue before he knew he had complied. Its relaxing fumes floated up through his brain, and in a moment or two the world felt stable around him again. The room was as it had always been, and Clef, her eyes were very bright. Sympathy showed in them for him, but for herself she was still brimmed with the high elation of what she had just been experiencing. "Come and sit down," she said gently, tugging at his arm. "I'm so sorry. I should not have played that over where you could hear it. I have no excuse, really. It was only that I forgot what the effect might be on one who had never heard Cindy's symphonies before. I was so impatient to see what he had done with his new subject. I'm so very sorry, Oliver. What was it? His voice sounded steadier than he had expected. The tea was responsible for that. He sipped again, glad of the consoling euphoria its fragrance brought. Uh, a composite interpretation of... Oh, Oliver, you know I must not answer questions. But, no, drink your tea and forget what it was you saw. Think of other things. Here, we'll have music, another kind of music, something gay. He reached for the wall beside the window, and as before, Oliver saw the broad-framed picture of blue water above the bed ripple and grow pale. Through it, another scene began to dawn like shapes rising beneath the surface of the sea. He had a glimpse of a dark curtained stage upon which a man in a tight, dark tunic and hose moved with a restless, sidelong pace, his hands and face startlingly pale against the black about him. He limped, he had a crooked back, and he spoke familiar lines. Oliver had seen John Barrymore once as a crook-backed Richard, and it seemed vaguely outrageous to him that any other actor should essay that difficult part. This one he had never seen before, but the man had a fascinatingly smooth manner, and his interpretation of the Plantagenet king was quite new and something Shakespeare probably never dreamed of. No, Cliff said, not this, nothing gloomy, and she put out her hand again. The nameless new Richard faded, and there was a swirl of changing pictures and changing voices, all blurred together. Before the scene studied upon a stage full of dancers in pastel ballet skirts, drifting effortlessly through some complicated pattern of motion. The music that went with it was light and effortless, too. The room filled up with a clear, floating melody. Oliver set down his cup. He felt much surer of himself now, and he thought the euphoric had done all it could for him. He didn't want to blur again mentally. There were things he meant to learn about. Now, he considered how to begin. Clef was watching him. That Halia, she said suddenly, she wants to buy the house. Oliver nodded. She's offering a lot of money. She was going to be awfully disappointed if... He hesitated. Perhaps, after all, Sue would not be disappointed. He remembered the little silver cube and the enigmatic function, and he wondered if she should mention it to Clef. But the euphoric had not reached that level in his brain, and he remembered his duty to Sue and was silent. Clef shook her head. Her eye upon his warm lid was it sympathy? Believe me, she said, you will not find that important after all. I promise you, Oliver. He stared at her. I wish you'd explain. Clef laughed at a note more sorrowful than amused. But it occurred to Oliver suddenly that there were no longer condescension in her voice. Imperceptibly, the air of delicate amusement had vanished from her manner toward him. The cool detachment that still marked O'Mary's attitude and Clea's was not in Clef's anymore. It was a subtlety he did not think she could assume. It had come spontaneously or not at all, and for no reason he was willing to examine, it became suddenly very important to Oliver that Clef should not condescend to him, that she should feel toward him as he felt toward her. He would not think of it. He looked down at his cup, rose quartz, exhaling a thin plume of steam from its crescent slit opening. This time, he thought, maybe he could make the tea work for him. For he remembered how it loosened the tongue, and there was a great deal he needed to know. The idea that had come to him on the porch and the instant of silent rivalry between Clef and Sue seemed now too fantastic to entertain. But some answer there must be. Clef herself gave him the opening. I must not take too much euphoric this afternoon, she said, smiling at him over her pink cup. It'll make me drowsy, and we're going out this evening with friends. More friends? Oliver asked. From your country? Clef nodded. Very dear friends we have expected all this week. I wish you'd tell me, Oliver said bluntly, where it is you come from. It isn't from here. Your culture is too different from ours. Even your names. He broke off as Clef shook her head. I wish I could tell you, but that is against all the rules. It is even against the rules for me to be here talking to you now. What rules? She made a helpless gesture. You must not ask me, Oliver. She leaned back on the chaise lounge, which adjusted itself luxuriously to the motion, and smiled very sweetly at him. We must not talk about things like that. Forget it. Listen to the music. Enjoy yourself if you can. She closed her eyes and laid her head back against the cushions. Oliver saw the round, tan throat swell as she began to hum a tune. Eyes still closed, she sang again the words that she had sung upon the stairs. Come hide her love to me. A memory clicked over suddenly in Oliver's mind. He had never heard the queer lagging tune before, but he thought he knew the words. He remembered what Holly's husband had said when he heard that line of song, and he leaned forward. He would not answer a direct question, but perhaps. Was the weather warm in Canterbury? He asked, and held his breath. Clef hummed another line of the song and shook her head, eyes still closed. It was autumn there, she said, but bright, wonderfully bright. Even their clothing, you know. Everyone was singing that new song, and I can't get it out of my head. She sang another line, and the words were almost unintelligible. English, yet not an English Oliver could understand. He stood up. Wait, he said, I want to find something. Back in a minute. She opened her eyes and smiled mistily at him, still humming. He went downstairs as fast as he could. The stairway swayed a little, though his head was nearly clear now, and into the library. The book he wanted was old and battered, interlined with pencil notes of his college days. He did not remember very clearly where the passage he wanted was, but he thumbed fast through the columns and by sheer luck found it within a few minutes. Then he went back upstairs, feeling a strange emptiness in his stomach because of what he almost believed now. Cliff, he said firmly, I know that song. I know the year it was new. Her lids rose slowly. She looked at him through a mist of euphoria. He was not sure she had understood. For a long moment she held him with her gaze. Then she put out one downy-sleeved arm and spread her tan fingers towards him. She laughed deep in her throat. Come hide her love to me, she said. He crossed the room slowly, took her hand. The fingers closed warmly about his. She pulled him down so that he had to kneel beside her. Her other arm lifted. Again she laughed, very softly, and closed her eyes, lifting her face to his. The kiss was warm and long. He caught something of her own euphoria from the fragrance of the tea breathed into his face, and he was startled at the end of the kiss, when the clasp of her arms loosened about his neck, to feel the sudden rush of his breath against his cheek. There were tears on her face, and the sound she made was a sob. He held her off and looked down in amazement. She sobbed once more, got a deep breath, and said, Oh, Oliver, Oliver. Then she shook her head and pulled free, turning away to hide her face. I'm sorry, she said unevenly. Please forgive me. It does not matter. I know it does not matter, but what's wrong? What doesn't matter? Nothing. Nothing. Please forget it. Nothing at all. She got a handkerchief from the table and blew her nose, smiling at him with an effect of radiance through the tears. Suddenly he was very angry. He had heard enough evasions and mystifying half-truths. He said roughly, Do you think I'm crazy? I know enough now to... Oliver, please. She held up her own cup, steaming fragrantly. Please, no more questions. Here, euphoria is what you need, Oliver. Euphoria, not answers. What year was it when you heard that song in Canterbury? He demanded, pushing the cup aside. She blinked at him, tears bright on her lashes. Why, what year do you think? I know, Oliver told her grimly. I know the year that song was popular. I know you just came back from Canterbury. Holly, his husband, said so. It's May now, but it was autumn in Canterbury, and you just came from there, so lately the song you heard is still running through your head. Chaucer's Pardoner's song sang that song time around the end of the 14th century. Did you see Chaucer, Cliff? What was it like in England that long ago? Cliff's eyes fixed his for a silent moment. Then her shoulders drooped and her whole body went limp with resignation beneath the soft blue robe. I am a fool, she said gently. It must have been easy to trap me. You really believe what you say? Oliver nodded. He said in a low voice, Few people do believe it. That is one of our maxims when we travel. We are safe from such suspicion because people before the travel began will not believe. The emptiness in Oliver's stomach suddenly doubled in volume. For an instant the bottom dropped out of time itself, and the universe was unsteady about him. He felt sick. He felt naked and helpless. There was a buzzing in his ears, and the room dimmed before him. He had not really believed, and not until this instant. He had expected some rational explanation from her that would tidy all his wild half-thoughts and suspicions into something a man could accept as belief. Not this. Clef dabbed at her eyes with a pale blue handkerchief and smiled tremendously. I know, she said. It must be a terrible thing to accept, to have all your concepts turned upside down. We know it from childhood, of course, but for you, here, Oliver, the euphoric will make it easier. He took the cup, the faint stain of her lip rouge still on the crusted opening. He drank, feeling the dizzy sweetness spiral through his head, and his brain turned a little in his skull as the volatile fragrance took effect. With that turning, focus shifted, and all his values with it. He began to feel better. The flesh settled on his bones again, and the warm clothing of temporal assurance settled upon his flesh, and he was no longer naked in a vortex of unstable time. The story is very simple, really, Clef said. We travel. Our own time is not terribly far ahead of yours. No, I must not say how far. But we still remember your songs and poets, some of your great actors. We are people of much leisure, and we cultivate the art of enjoying ourselves. This is a tour we are making, a tour of your seasons, vintage seasons. That autumn in Canterbury was the most magnificent autumn our researchers could discover anywhere. We rode in a pilgrimage to the shrine. It was a wonderful experience, though the clothing was a little hard to manage. Now this month of May is almost over, and the loveliest May in recorded times. A perfect May and a wonderful period. You have no way of knowing what a good gay period you live in, Oliver. The very feeling in the air of the cities, that wonderful national confidence and happiness, everything going as smoothly as a dream. There were other Mays with fine weather, but each of them had a war, or a famine, or something else wrong. She hesitated, grimaced, and went on rapidly. In a few days we are to meet at the coronation in Rome, she said. I think the year will be 800, Christmas time. But why? Oliver interrupted. Do you insist on this house? Why do the others want to get it away from you? Blythe stared at him. He saw the tears rising again in small bright crescents that gathered above her lower lids. He saw the look of obstinacy that came upon her soft tan face. She shook her head. You must not ask me that. She held out the steaming cup. Here, drink and forget what I have said. I can tell you no more. No more at all. When he woke, for a little while he had no idea where he was. He did not remember leaving Clough or coming to his own room. He didn't care just then, for he woke in a sense of overwhelming terror. The dark was full of it. His brain rocked on waves of fear and pain. He lay motionless, too, frightened to stir, some atavistic memory warning him to be quiet until he knew from which direction the danger threatened. Reasonless panic broke over him in a tidal flow. His head ached with its violence, and the dark throbbed to the same rhythms. A knock sounded at the door. Mary's deep voice said, Wilson! Wilson, are you awake? Oliver tried twice before he had the breath to answer. Yes, what is it? The knob rattled. Mary's dim figure groped for the light switch, and the room sprang into visibility. Mary's face was drawn with strain, and he held one hand to his head as if it ached in rhythm with Oliver's. It was in that moment, before Mary spoke again, that Oliver remembered Holia's warning. Move out, young man. Move out before tonight. Wildly he wondered what threatened them all in this dark house that throbbed with the rhythms of pure terror. Mary, in an angry voice, answered the unspoken question. Someone has planted a subsonic in the house, Wilson. Gus thinks you may know where it is. The subsonic? Call it a gadget, Mary interpreted impatiently. Perhaps a small metal box that... Oh, Oliver said, in a tone that must have told Mary everything. Where is it? He demanded. Quick, let's get this over. I don't know. In one effort, Oliver controlled the clattering of his teeth. You mean all this is just from a little box? Of course. Now tell me how to find it before we all go crazy. Oliver got shakily out of bed, groping for his robe with nervousness hands. I suppose she hid it somewhere downstairs, he said. She wasn't gone long. And Mary got the story out of him in a few brief questions. He clicked his teeth in aspiration, and Oliver had finished it. stupid Holly. Oh, Mary! Clef's plaintive voice wailed from the hall. Please hurry, oh, Mary, this is too much to stand. Oh, Mary, please! Oliver stood up abruptly. Then a redoubled wave of inexplicable pain seemed to explode in his skull at the motion, and he clutched the bedpost and reeled. Go find the thing yourself, he heard himself saying dizzily. I can't even walk. Now Mary's own temper was drawn wire-tight by the pressure in the room. He seized Oliver's shoulder and shook him, saying in a tight voice, You let it in, now help us get it out, or it's a gadget out of your world, not mine, Oliver said furiously. And then it seemed to him there was a sudden coldness and silence in the room. Even the pain and the senseless terror paused for a moment. Mary's pale, cold eyes fixed upon Oliver, a stare so chill he could almost feel the ice in it. What do you know about our world? Mary demanded. Oliver did not speak a word. He did not need to. His face must have betrayed what he knew. It was beyond concealment, and the stress of this nighttime terror he could still not understand. And Mary bared his white teeth and said three perfectly unintelligible words. Then he stepped to the door and snapped, Clef! Oliver could see the two women huddled together in the hall, shaking violently with involuntary waves of that strange synthetic terror. Clea, in a luminous green gown, was rigid with control, but Clef made no effort whatsoever at repression. Her downy robe had turned soft gold tonight. She shivered in it, and tears ran down her face unchecked. Clef, Mary said in a dangerous voice, you were euphoric again yesterday. Clef darted a scared glance at Oliver and nodded guiltily. You talk too much. It was a complete indictment in one sentence. You know the rules, Clef. You will not be allowed to travel again if anyone reports us to the authorities. Clef's lovely creamy face creased suddenly into impotent dimples. I know it was wrong. I'm very sorry, but you will not stop me if Cindy says no. Leah flung out her arms in a gesture of helpless anger, and Mary shrugged. In this case, as it happens, no great harm is done, he said, giving Oliver an unfathomable glance. But it might have been serious. Next time, perhaps it will be. I must have a talk with Cindy. Let's find the subsonic first of all, Clea reminded him, shivering. If Clef is afraid to help, she can go out for a while. I confess I'm very sick of Clef's company just now. We could give up the house, Clef cried wildly. Let Halia have it. How can you stand this long up to hunt? Give up the house? Clea echoed. You must be mad. With all their invitations out? There will be no need for that, Mary said. We can find it if we all hunt. You feel able to help? He looked at Oliver. With an effort, Oliver controlled his own senseless panic as the waves of it swept through the room. Yes, he said, but what about me? What are you going to do? That should be obvious, Mary said, his pale eyes and dark face regarding Oliver impassively. Keep you in the house until we go. We can certainly do no less. You understand that? And there's no reason for us to do more, as it happens. Silence is all we promised when we signed our travel papers. But Oliver groped for the fallacy in that reasoning. There was no use. He could not think clearly. Panic surged insanely through his mind from the very air around him. All right, he said. Let's hunt. It was dawn before they found the box, tucked inside the ripped seam of a sofa cushion. And Mary took me upstairs without a word. 5 minutes later, the pressure in the air abruptly dropped, and peace fell blissfully upon the house. They will try again, Mary said to Oliver at the door of the back bedroom. We must watch for that. As for you, I must see that you remain in the house until Friday. For your own comfort, I advise you let me know if Halia offers any further tricks. I confess I'm not quite sure how to enforce your staying indoors. I could use methods that would make you very uncomfortable. I would prefer to accept your word on it. Oliver hesitated. The relaxing of pressure upon his brain had left him exhausted and stupid, and he was not at all sure what to say. And Mary went on after a moment. It was partially our fault for not ensuring that we had the house to ourselves, he said. Living here with us, you could scarcely help suspecting. Shall we say that in return for your promise, I reimburse you part for losing the sale price on this house? Oliver thought that over. It would pacify Sue a little, and it meant only 2 days indoors. Besides, what good would escaping do? What could he say to outsiders that would not lead him straight to a padded cell? All right, I said wearily. I promise. By Friday morning, there was still no sign from Halia. Sue telephoned at noon. Oliver knew the crackle of her voice over the wire when Clef took call. Even the crackle sounded hysterical. Sue saw her bargain slipping hopelessly through her grasping little fingers. Clef's voice was soothing. I am sorry, she said many times, in the intervals when the voice paused. I am truly sorry. Believe me, you'll find it does not matter. I know. I am sorry. She turned from the phone at last. The girl says Halia has given up, she told the others. Not Halia, Leah said firmly. And Mary shrugged. We have very little time left. If she intends on anything more, it will be tonight. We must watch for it. Oh, not tonight. Cliff's voice was horrified. Not even Halia would do that. Halia, my dear, in her own way, is quite as unscrupulous as you are, Mary told her with a smile. But would she spoil things for us just because she can't be here? What do you think? Leah demanded. Oliver ceased to listen. There's no making sense out of their talk. Then he knew that by tonight, whatever the secret was must surely come into the open at last. He was willing to wait and see. For 2 days, excitement had been building up in the house, and the three shared it with it. Even the servants felt it, and were nervous and unsure of themselves. Oliver had given up asking questions. It only embarrassed his tenants, and watched. And watched. All the chairs in the house were collected in the three front bedrooms. Furniture was rearranged to make room for them, and dozens of covered cups had been set out on trays. Oliver recognized Clef's rose quartz set among the rest. No steam arose from the thin crescent openings, but the cups were full. Oliver lifted one and felt a heavy liquid move within it, like something half solid, sluggish. Guests were obviously expected, but the regular dinner hour of 9 came and went, and no one had yet arrived. Dinner was finished. The servants went home. The Franciscos went to their rooms to dress amid a feeling of mounting tension. Oliver stepped out onto the porch after dinner, trying in vain to guess what it was that had wrought such a pitch of expectancy in the house. There was a quarter moon swimming in haze on the horizon, but the stars, which had made every night of May thus far a dazzling translucency, were very dim tonight. Clouds had begun to gather at sundown, and the undimmed weather of the whole month seemed ready to break at last. Behind Oliver, the door opened a little, and closed. He caught Clef's fragrance before he turned, and a faint whiff of the fragrance of euphoric she was much too fond of drinking. She came to his side and slipped a hand into his, looking up into his face in the darkness. Oliver, she said very softly, promise me one thing. Promise me not to leave the house tonight. I've already promised that, he said a little irritably. I know, but tonight I have a very particular reason for wanting you indoors tonight. She leaned her head against his shoulder for a moment, and despite himself, his irritation softened. He had not seen Clef alone since that last night of her revelations. He supposed he never would be alone with her again for more than a few minutes at a time, but he knew he would not forget those two bewildering evenings. He knew, too, now that she was very weak and foolish, but she was still Clef, and he had held her in his arms and was not likely ever to forget it. You might be hurt if you went out tonight, she was saying in a muffled voice. I know it will not matter in the end, but remember you promised, Oliver. He was gone again, and the door had closed behind her before she could voice the futile questions in his mind. The guests began to arrive just before midnight. From the head of the stairs, Oliver saw them coming in by twos and threes, and was astonished at how many of these people from the future must have gathered here in the past weeks. He could see quite clearly now how they differed from the norm of his own period. Their physical elegance was what one noticed first: perfect grooming, meticulous manners, meticulous controlled voices. But because they were all idle, all, in a way, hunters, there was a certain shrillness underlying their voices, especially when heard all together. Petulant and self-indulgence showed beneath the good manners, and tonight an all-pervasive excitement. By 1 o'clock everyone had gathered in the front rooms. The teacups had begun to steam, apparently of themselves, around midnight, and the house was full of the faint, thin fragrance that induced a sort of euphoria all through the rooms, breathed in with the perfume of the tea. It made Oliver feel light and drowsy. He was determined to sit up as long as the others did, but he must have dozed off in his own room by the window, an unopened book in his lap. When it happened, he was not sure for a few minutes whether or not it was a dream. The vast, incredible crash was louder than sound. He felt the whole house shake under him, felt rather than heard the timbers grind upon one another like broken bones while he was still in the borderland of sleep. When he woke fully, he was on the floor among the shattered fragments of the window. How long or short a time he lay there, he did not know. The world was still stunned from that tremendous noise, or his ears still deaf from it, for there was no sound anywhere. He was halfway down the hall toward the front rooms when sound began to return from outside. It was a low, indescribable rumble at first, trickled with countless tiny distant screams. Oliver's eardrums ached from the terrible impact of the vast unheard noise, but the numbness was wearing off, and he heard before he saw it the first voices of the stricken city. The door to Clef's room resisted him for a moment. The house had settled a little from the violence of the explosion, and the frame was out of line. When he got the door open, he could only stand blinking stupidly into the darkness within. All the lights were out, but there was a breathless sort of whispering going on in many voices. The chairs were drawn around the broad front windows so that everyone could see out. The air swam with the fragrance of euphoria. There was light enough here from outside for Oliver to see that a few onlookers still had their hands to their ears, but all were craning eagerly forward to see. Through dreamlike haze, Oliver saw the city spread out with impossible distinctness below the window. He knew quite well that a row of houses across the street blocked the view, yet he was looking over the city now, and he could see it in a limitless panorama from here to the horizon. The houses between had vanished. On the far skyline, fire was already a solid mass, painting the low clouds crimson. That sulphurous light, reflecting back from the sky upon the city, made clear the rows upon rows of flattened houses with flame beginning to lick up upon them, among them, and farther out the formless rubble of what had been houses a few minutes ago and was now nothing at all. The city had begun to be vocal. The noise of the flames rose loudest, but you could hear a rumble of human voices like the beat of surf a long way off. And staccato noises of screaming made a sort of pattern that came and went continuously through this web of sound. Threading it in undulating waves, the shrieks of sirens knit the web together in a terrible symphony that had in its way a strange inhuman beauty. Briefly through Oliver's stunned incredulity went the memory of that other symphony Clef had played here one day, another catastrophe retold in terms of music and moving shapes. He said hoarsely, "Clef." The tableau by the window broke. Every head turned, and Oliver saw the faces of strangers staring at him, some few in embarrassment, avoiding his eyes, but most seeking them out with that avid, inhuman curiosity which is common to a type and all crowds at accident scenes. But these people were here by design, audience at a vast disaster timed almost for their coming. Clef got up unsteadily, her velvet dinner gown tripping her as she rose. She set down a cup and swayed a little as she came towards the door, saying, "Oliver, Oliver," in a sweet, uncertain voice. She was drunk, he saw, and wrought up by the catastrophe to a pitch of stimulation in which she was not very sure what she was doing. Oliver heard himself saying in a thin voice not his own, What was it, Clef? What happened? What But happened seemed so inadequate a word for the incredible panorama below that he had to choke back hysterical laughter upon the struggling questions, and broke off entirely, trying to control the shaking that had seized his body. Clef made an unsteady stoop and seized the steaming cup. She came to him, swaying, holding it out, her panacea for all ills. "Here, drink it, Oliver. We're all quite safe here, quite safe." She thrust the cup to his lips, and he gulped automatically, grateful for the fumes that began their slow coiling surcease in his brain with the first swallow. "It was a meteor," Cliff was saying. "Quite a small meteor, really. We're perfectly safe here. This house was never touched." Out of some cell of the unconscious, Oliver heard himself saying incoherently, Sue? Is Sue? He could not finish. Clef thrust the cup at him again. I think she may be safe, for a while. Please, Oliver, forget all about all that and drink. But you knew. Realization of that came belatedly to his stunned brain. You could have given warning, or how could we change the past? Clef asked. We knew, but could we stop the meteor, or warn the city? Before we come, we must give her word never to interfere. Their voices had risen imperceptibly to be audible above the rising volume of sound from below. The city was roaring now with flames and cries and the crash of falling buildings. Light in the room turned lurid and pulsed upon the walls and ceiling in red light and redder dark. At downstairs a door slammed. Someone laughed. It was a high, hoarse, angry laughter. Then from the crowd in the room some gasped, and there was a chorus of dismayed cries. Oliver tried to focus upon the window and the terrible panorama beyond, and found he could not. It took several seconds of determined blinking to prove that more than his own vision was at fault. Clef whimpered softly and moved against him. His arms closed about her automatically, and he was grateful for the warm, solid flesh against him. This much at least he could touch and be sure of, though everything else that was happening might be a dream. Her perfume and the heady perfume of the tea rose together in his head, and for an instant, holding her in this embrace that must certainly be the last time he ever held her, he did not care that something had gone terribly wrong with the very air of the room. It was blindness, not continuous, but a series of swift, widening ripples between which he could catch glimpses of the other faces in the room, strained and astonished in the flickering light from the city. The ripples came faster. There was only a blink of sight between them now, and the blinks grew briefer and briefer, the intervals of darkness more broad. And downstairs the laughter rose up again, rose again up the stairwell. Oliver thought he knew the voice. He opened his mouth to speak, but a door nearby slammed open before he could find his tongue, and O'Mary shouted down the stairs. Hollia? He roared above the roaring of the city. Hollia, is that you? She laughed again triumphantly. I warned you, her hoarse, harsh laughter voice called. Now come out in the street with the rest of us if you want to see any more. Hollia. Hollia! Omaria shouted desperately. Stop this or... The laughter was derisive. What will you do, O'Murray? This time I hit it too well. Come down in the street if you want to watch the rest. There was an angry silence in the house. Oliver could feel Clef's quick, excited breathing light upon his cheek, feel the soft motions of her body in his arms. He tried consciously to make the moment last, stretch it out to infinity. Everything had happened too swiftly to impress very clearly on his mind anything except what he could touch and hold. He held her in an embrace made consciously light, though he wanted to clasp her in a tight and sparing grip because he was sure this was the last embrace they would ever share. The eye-straining blinks of light and blindness went on. From far away below, the roar of the burning city rolled on, threaded together by the long, looping cadences of the sirens that linked all sounds into one. Then, in the bewildering dark, another voice sounded from the hall downstairs. A man's voice, very deep, very melodious, saying, What is this? What are you doing here? Hollia, is that you? Oliver felt Clef stiffen in his arms. She caught her breath, but she said nothing in an instant, while heavy feet began to mount the stairs, coming up with a solid, confident tread that shook the old house to each step. And Clef thrust herself hard out of Oliver's arms. He heard her high, sweet, excited voice crying, Sinby! Sinby! And she ran to meet the newcomer through the waves of dark and light that swept the shaken house. Oliver staggered a little and felt a chair seat catching the back of his legs. He sank into it and lifted his lips the cup he still held. The steam was warm and moist in his face, though he could scarcely make out the shape of the rim. He lifted it with both hands and drank. When he opened his eyes, it was quite dark in the room. Also, it was silent except for a thin, melodious humming almost below the threshold of sound. Oliver struggled with the memory of a monstrous nightmare. He put it resolutely out of his mind and sat up, feeling an unfamiliar bed creak its way under him. This was Clef's room. But no, Clef's no longer. Her shining hangings were gone from the walls, her white resilient rug, her pictures. The room looked at his look before she came, except one thing. In the far corner was a table, a block of translucent stuff, out of which light poured softly. A man sat on a low stool before it, leaning forward, his heavy shoulders outlined against the glow. He wore earphones and he was making quick, erratic notes upon a pad on his knee, swaying a little as if to the tune of unheard music. Curtains were drawn, but from beyond them came a distant, muffled roaring that Oliver remembered from his nightmare. He put a hand to his face, aware of the feverish warmth and a dipping of the room before his eyes. His head ached, and there was a deep malaise in every limb and nerve. As the bed creaked, the man in the corner turned, sliding the earphones down like a collar. He had a strong, sensitive face above the dark beard, trimmed short. Oliver had never seen him before, but he had that air Oliver knew so well by now, of remoteness which was the knowledge of time itself lying like a gulf between them. When he spoke, his deep voice was impersonally kind. "You had too much euphoric, Wilson," he said, aloofly sympathetic. "You slept a long while." "How long?" Oliver's throat felt sticky when he spoke. The man did not answer. Oliver shook his head experimentally. He said, "I thought Clef said you don't get hangovers from." And then another thought interrupted the first, and he said quickly, "Where is Clef?" He looked confusedly toward the door. "They should be in Rome by now, watching Charlemagne's coronation at St. Peter's on Christmas Day more than 1,000 years from here." That was not a thought Oliver could grasp clearly. His aching brain sheared away from it. He found thinking at all was strangely difficult. Staring at the man, he traced an idea painfully to its conclusion. So they've gone on, but you stayed behind? Why? Your Sinby? I heard your Symphonia, Clef called it. I heard part of it. I've not finished it yet. I needed this. Sinby inclined his head towards the curtain beyond which the subdued roaring still went on. You needed the meteor? The knowledge worked painfully through his dulled brain until it seemed to strike some area still untouched by the aching, an area still alive to implication. The meteor, but there was a power implicit in Sinby's raised hand that seemed to push Oliver down upon the bed again. Sinby said patiently, "The worst of it is past now, for a while. Forget, if you can. That was days ago. I said you were asleep for some time. I let you rest. I knew this house would be safe, from the fire at least." "Then something's more to come?" Oliver only mumbled his question. He was not sure he wanted an answer. He had been curious so long, and now that knowledge lay almost within reach, something about his brain seemed to refuse to listen. Perhaps this weariness, this feverish, dizzy feeling, would pass as the effect of the euphoric wore off. Sinby's voice ran on, smoothly, soothingly, almost as if Sinby too did not want him to think. It was easiest to lie there and listen. "I'm a composer," Cindy was saying. "I happen to be interested in interpreting certain forms of disaster in my own terms. That is why I stayed on. The others are dilettantes. They came for the May weather and the spectacle, the aftermath. Well, why should they wait for that? As for myself, I suppose I'm a connoisseur. I find the aftermath rather fascinating, and I need it. I need to study it at first hand for my own purposes." His eyes dwelt upon Oliver for an instant very keenly, like a physician's eyes, impersonal and observing. Absently he reached for his stylus and the notepad, and as he moved, Oliver saw a familiar mark on the underside of the thick tanned wrist. "Buff had that scar too," he heard himself whisper, "and the others. Inoculation. It was necessary, under the circumstances. He did not want disease to spread in our own time world." "Disease?" Slimby shrugged. He would not recognize the name. "But if you could inoculate against disease—" Oliver thrust himself up on an aching arm. He had half grasped upon a thought now which he did not want to let go. Effort seemed to make the ideas come more clearly through his mounting confusion. With enormous effort he went on. "I'm getting it now," he said. "Wait, I've been trying to work this out. You can change history?" "You can. I know you can. Plus said she had to promise not to interfere. We all had to promise. Does that mean you can really change your own past? Our time?" Sinby laid down his pad again. He looked at Oliver thoughtfully. A dark intent looked under heavy brows. "Yes," he said. "Yes, the past can be changed. But it's extremely difficult, and it has never been allowed." He shrugged. "Theoretical science. We do not change history, Wilson. If we change our past, our present would be altered too, and our time world is entirely to our liking. Oliver spoke louder against the roaring from beyond the windows. But you've got the power. You could alter history if you wanted to wipe out all the pain and suffering and tragedy. All of that passed away long ago, Sinby said. Not now! Not this! Sinby looked at him enigmatically for a while. Then, this too, he said. And suddenly Oliver realized from across what distances Sinbad was watching him. A vast distance as time is measured. The dying city outside, the whole world of now was not quite real to Sinby. It was merely one of the building blocks that had gone to support the edifice on which Sinby's culture stood in a misty, unknown, terrible future. It seemed terrible to Oliver now. Even Clef, all of them had been touched with the pettiness, the faculty that enabled Talia to concentrate on her malicious small schemes to acquire a ringside seat while the meteor thundered in towards Earth's atmosphere. They were all dilettantes, Clef and Mary and the others. They toward time, but only as onlookers. Were they bored, sated with their normal existence? Not sated enough to wish change, basically. They dared not change the past. They could not risk flawing their own present. Revulsion shook him. Remembering the touch of Clef's lips, he felt a sour sickness on his tongue. Clef, leaving him for the barbaric splendid coronation at Rome 1,000 years ago. How had she seen him? Not as a living, breathing man. He knew that, very certainly. Clef's race were spectators. He lay back on the bed, letting the room swirl away into the darkness behind his closed and aching lids. The ache was implicit in every cell of his body, almost a second ego taking possession and driving him out of himself, strong, sure ego taking over as he himself let go. Why, he wondered dully, should Clef have lied? She had said there was no aftermath to the drink she had given him. No aftermath, and yet this painful possession was strong enough to edge him out of his own body. Clef had not lied. There was no aftermath to drink. He knew that, but the knowledge was no longer touched his brain or his body. He lay still, giving them up to the power of the illness which was aftermath to something far stronger than the strongest drink. The illness that had no name yet. He hardly noticed when Sinbad left. He lay motionless for a long while, thinking feverishly, I gotta find some way to tell people. If I'd have known in advance, maybe something could have been done. We'd have forced them to tell us how to change the probabilities. We could have evacuated the city. If I could leave a message. Maybe not for today's people, but later. They visit all through time. If they could be recognized and caught somewhere, sometime, and made to change destiny. It wasn't easy to stand up. The room kept tilting, but he managed it. He found a pencil and a paper, and through the swaying of the shadows, he wrote down what he could. Enough. Enough to warn, enough to save. He put the sheets on the table in plain sight and weighted them down before he stumbled back to bed through closing darkness. The house was dynamited 6 days later, part of the futile attempt to halt the relentless spread of the Blue Death. And so ends the vintage season. Guests have departed. Summer is over, and the man who opened his home to those beautiful, particular strangers now understands. Too late, as understanding always arrives in these stories, what the season actually was, what they actually came for, why this summer, why this place, why they watched everything with such focused aesthetic appreciation. C. L. Moore wrote Vintage Season in 1946, a year after the end of the World War. Make of that timing what you will. The story has been adapted twice, once for film in 1992 as Timescape, which is worth your time if tonight's reading stayed with you. But Moore's original prose is the same. The way she renders beauty is something that can be collected, curated, witnessed from a careful distance by people who know exactly what's coming and find it, above all else, exquisite. That is the coldest horror in the Hitchcock anthology so far. Not the cocoon, not the sound machine, this. Next episode, Episode 11, we follow with Pieces of Silver by Brett Halliday, a different register entirely. But tonight, sit with the season a moment longer. This has been Felix Lebesky, signing off from SL Tonight. Good night.